Karen Stahl Don has a master's degree in Arabic and Near Eastern Studies from the University of Michigan, a law degree from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and a master's in law from Cardozo University. She wrote her thesis on the Mandate for Palestine. She's a legal advisor of Legal Grants Campaign and works with organizations including Women in Green, Regavim, and the Sovereignty Institute. She specializes in international law, and she's going to tell us today, maybe we should turn off the light, right? Why international law is Israel's best friend. Karen, bevakasha.
It's such a great honor to be here. It's great to be back at veGaon on a Friday morning, and it's great to see everyone here. Is that better? I'm sitting here and I'm struck by the memory of Helen Friedman. And I have the striking memory of Helen sitting handcuffed to a chair in New York City after having been arrested for stopping traffic during rush hour in New York City to protest America's policy against Israel. And I had the honor of being called as her attorney to get her out of jail. And that is a badge of honor. And Helen seems like a delicate, and she is a beautiful woman, but she is a lioness, and she's a fighter for Israel. And it's a great pleasure to see you here, and I welcome you. So, why do I say that international law is Israel's best friend? First, I have to say, I know very well that Torah is the source of our rights to Eretz Yisrael. There's nothing to discuss. But I'm going to speak about secular legal rights in terms of international law, which is on a totally different level, but it also supports our rights in Israel. And I see international law as a weapon and a shield that's been made available to us by the amazing course of events, the same course of events that have brought us to veGaon, that have brought us back to Eretz Yisrael. But these are tools that are available to us, even though it's certainly not Torah, and I'm not speaking on that level. So why shouldn't we use it? Why are we so afraid to pick up these tools and use them? And this is what I want to talk about a little bit, very briefly. We have valid and binding documents that clearly establish Israel's rights under modern international law to be here, to be in veGaon, to be in Yehuda and Shomron and Yerushalayim. And our main problem with international law is that we're not using it enough. It's so relevant, and there's so many effective tools that we can use, and we're not doing so. And these are tools for debate, tools that we can use to engage people and win on the level and disrupt a very false narrative. So I have a few pieces of good news and then some not such good news. The first good news, we're not as alone on the international legal arena as we may feel. I'm sorry, should I speak louder? Oh.
וולי, תרימו את המיקרופון, שנשמע יותר טוב.
Okay. I recently attended an international law conference at the Peace Palace in The Hague, and was sponsored by THINK, the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation, entitled Towards a New International Law Paradigm for the Israel-Palestine Conflict. And I think this is what we need. I think we can all agree. We need a new paradigm. We need a successful paradigm. And this is what scholars, legal professors, academics from all over the world came to Hague to do, to create a new paradigm. I was representing Legal Grounds, a group that many of you know, or all of you know, Legal Grounds Campaign, which promotes Israel's legal rights in Yehuda and Shomron and Jerusalem. And people came from all over the world to be at this conference. They came from Singapore, Germany, Hungary, France, Spain, England, Australia, of course the US, of course Israel, and there were even people from Indonesia, a country that has no diplomatic relations with Israel. And they all came to contribute and try to find a way to create a paradigm, a successful paradigm under international law that could promote Israel's rights to Judea and Samaria. And so many of them asked me to relay to you that Israel's not alone. We may feel alone often, but it's not true. We are not alone, and these people are coming to support us. And we have an army of academics that fight for Israel, stand for Israel, and promote our rights under international law. And actually, the Hague Statement of Juris on the Palestine conflict came out, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and it'll soon be available online. And this is a compilation of the work that we did there. It's something that can be used to promote positive, to contribute positive tools to the international law debate. So I encourage you to go to the website of Think and to Legal Grounds and take a look at this document. Because people are so concerned, legal academics are so concerned because they see this as a question beyond that dealing with Israel. People understand that what's going on today is not only a question of the rights of Jews in Israel, but it's a question of the international rule of law, and that is what is under attack here. We're talking about arbitrary acts that not only threaten Israel, but threaten the rule of law in the entire world. And at the conference, Professor Lee Ann Theo, a professor of international law from the National University of Singapore, spoke about a way to frame the paradigm in terms of the supremacy of international rule of law as an approach that can disrupt the anti-Israeli narrative and speak to people beyond the conflict, people that aren't subsumed with the ideological issues and the religious issues, but people that are beyond that. And there are people beyond that. For example, the populations in Asia and Africa. Many of these smaller countries find Israel a very attractive, an ally in terms of technology and nation building. They're not focused on BDS, they're not focused on illegal settlements, they're not focused on political correctness. They're focused on building their countries, their economies. They're focused on the future, and they view Israel as a model to emulate as a small country that has built itself up and is contributing to the world and achieving greatness. So this is the way we're viewed in many parts of the world, and this is something that we can build upon by using tools of international law and building a bridge to allow us to promote Israel's rights, but through different paradigms as well. Third, and not to overstate this, but international law, we can bypass Europe through international law because Europe is passé at this point, and we can reach out to the young populations in Asia and Africa who are more than willing to learn from Israel and want to join us in our quest. Not to overstate this, but Europe is also changing. And people who have come recently from Europe have said that they've noticed a change in the atmosphere in Europe. The influx of Muslims has changed some people's attitudes and softened their attitudes. They're becoming more sympathetic to Israel and what we're up against, realizing that we live in such a tough neighborhood. And also, the growing power of Iran softens even some Arab countries towards Israel. And oil prices are down. Arab countries are looking at Israel slightly differently, even as a potential source of energy. And their stranglehold has decreased dramatically. So this means that this is a time now to assert our rights under international law and advance sovereignty, advance Ribonut. Because this is a lull that doesn't occur all the time, but it's a combination of circumstances that are giving us an opening to do so. So now I have some not such good news, which of course isn't really news, and that's the narrative pertaining to Israel's standing under international law has been hijacked, has become deeply entrenched in an anti-Israel narrative that's unsupported by fact, law, or history. And we have to disrupt this narrative. There was a professor there, Jeremy Rapkin from George Mason University, who told a story about the U.S. Institute of Peace conference he attended in Washington. And there, a political officer from Sweden gave a speech, and she spoke about, in passing, the illegal Israeli settlements on the West Bank. And he stood up and he said, "What are your sources? Why are you saying that Jews living in Judea and Samaria are violating international law? What is your reason?" And what did she answer? This is the Swedish political officer at a conference. She stated, "Everyone knows that." That was her answer. She didn't cite history. She didn't cite law. She said, "Everyone knows that." And that's our problem. That's our problem. It's become so entrenched that there's no room for discussion. People see no reason to discuss it or question it. So in the time that's remaining, I'd like to very briefly discuss one of the religious mantras of the two states, one aspect of that Sam spoke about. I know that the time is short, but I wanted to address it because it's a way to disrupt the narrative on this two-state solution that has become a mantra. Despite its lack of legal validity, the partition plan of 1947 has become accepted as binding law and has become entrenched in the narrative that castigates Israel for violating international law and refusing to implement the partition plan, a proposal that's quite different from what many of you think it is. And I'm going to give you some facts that I think a lot of you may not know about what is actually contained in this plan, the partition plan. And why is this relevant? It's relevant because there's an attempt to give gravitas to the two-state solution by stating that international law has recognized the right to a separate state since 1947. And so it's important for us, I'm going to bring you some tools here and some facts to disrupt this narrative. And again, I'm being very brief. It's a complicated issue, and there are papers available. One you can find on the Legal Grounds website and other papers that go into more detail, but I just wanted to bring a few points home. And the brashness is amazing that Mahmoud Abbas could stand in front of the United Nations and say that Israel's violating international law under these circumstances. On September 22nd, 2016, Mahmoud Abbas, president of the Palestinian Authority, stood before the United Nations during the General Assembly's annual debate and accused Israel of violating international law when he stated, "Israel since 1948 has persisted with its contempt for international legitimacy by violating United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181, the Partition Resolution, which called for the establishment of two states on the historic land of Palestine according to a specific partition plan. Israeli forces seized more land than allotted to Israel, constituting a grave breach of Articles 39, 41, and 42 of the United Nations Charter." He goes on to say, however, the Security Council is not upholding its responsibilities to hold Israel accountable for its seizure of territory allotted to the Palestinian state according to the partition plan. So the Palestinians are arguing that they retain rights from this resolution from 1947, Resolution 181, despite the fact that they rejected the proposal in 1947, despite the fact that they launched a war against it, and despite the fact that 70 years have passed. They maintain the resolution remains valid, with the option being held open to them ad infinitum until they decide the time is right to accept it. This argument is really widespread, and it's blatantly false on every level. It crumbles by merely reading the resolution and understanding what's contained there and the legal context. So there are multiple facets. First of all, the Arabs clearly rejected the agreement. The Secretary General met with a representative of the Arab Higher Committee who said, "The Arabs of Palestine will never recognize the validity of the extorted partition recommendations or the authority of the UN to make them. No Arab will cooperate." They made a solemn declaration before the UN, before God and history, and they will never submit or yield to any power going to Palestine to enforce partition. The only way to establish partition is to wipe them out, man, woman, and child. And I just want to make an interesting comment. When I was researching this, I had the opportunity of reading many of the actual transcripts from the UN committee meetings. And it is so striking that one can read this Arab dialogue, and it's practically timeless. You don't even know what year it's from. It could be from yesterday, it could be from today. And they're on message, they're consistent, they're passionate, and it's the same sense of belief in their cause. On the other hand, when I read the rhetoric of the Jewish rhetoric, the Israeli rhetoric, the Israeli dialogue from that time, it was really different. The years of 1947 and the formation, the early years of the state, reveals language that's passionate, bravely nationalistic, assertive, brash with righteous indignation of why Jews deserve a state on every level, based on international law, based on right, based on Torah. But there was a sense of passion. Now we're not on message, and we have to get back on message. We have to improve the nationalistic mentality that Yehudit was speaking about. We have to build up our nationalist energy, and we have to stop the brainwashing that somehow has completely changed the tone of the dialogue. According to law, according to logic, one who rejects an agreement retains no rights based on that agreement. This logical principle was clearly upheld under international law by the International Court of Justice in the Namibia decision. One of the fundamental principles governing the international relationship is that a party which disowns or does not fulfill its own obligations cannot be recognized as retaining the rights which it claims to derive from the relationship. Again, they still want to claim that this has validity because it gives a lot of legitimacy to their argument. But what did Resolution 181 really call for? I just want to point out, this is hard to explain in a brief time, but I want to explain that there's only one partition plan that was ever passed or suggested in the United Nations, and this is Resolution 181. And this is the plan. And people are under the impression today that Resolution 181, or the partition plan, is a mere partition plan. They believe that it's a plan that is simply going to divide the land and give one part to the Jews and one part to the Arabs. And this isn't true. This is not what is in Resolution 181. Resolution 181, I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. All right, we'll go to here. It includes a plan for economic union, and it includes the plan that the two states would work together closely. There would be a joint currency system, there would be joint international exchange rate, a customs union, joint economics board, common transportation system, joint postal, telephone, and telegraphic services, ports and airports, shared water, power, and facilities and irrigation. Israel accepted the partition with these conditions. They accepted it knowing that, or believing that there would be a population next to them that would cooperate with them. These were the conditions upon that Israel accepted. And again, these are the only conditions that exist in any partition plan that's ever been passed, that's ever been proposed by the United Nations. And this plan clearly requires Arab cooperation to be implemented. So it's truly ridiculous to blame Israel for not implementing Arab cooperation. This is something beyond Israel's ability to do. No country can force another country to cooperate and build a network such as this. It's also clear that the resolution of the General Assembly, these resolutions aren't binding without the agreement of both parties. And only recommendations, they're only recommendations as defined in chapters 10 and 17 of the UN Charter. In fact, the representatives of Egypt and the other Arab countries expressed this at the time. They said, recommendations of the General Assembly are only that. They're only recommendations. What? 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. And we don't feel bound by it, and we aren't going to do it. So in the past, they were recommendations. Now it's something that Mahmoud Abbas is claiming we're bound by as by law. So Resolution 181 never came to fruition, and it was abandoned, and that's the other thing that I don't think people realize. There was a UN Palestine Commission that was set up to, among other things, define the borders of what would be in these two states. And they were thwarted on every level. They were thwarted by the UN Security Council, by the mandate, by the Arabs, by the British, and it never even got off the ground. The commission never even got here. And so it turns out that no boundaries were ever even set for Resolution 181, for the partition plan. There are no final boundaries that were ever set because the UN Palestine Commission was not allowed to do so. Instead, there's only a sketch of a proposed map. And again, this is something that few people know. So Resolution 181 is now null and void. I'm not going to go over all of these points again, but I will say this. Since Resolution 181 never took effect or became binding, the mandate, according to international law, remains the source of the final legal and binding international agreement on these issues. And that's why this issue is so important under international law, because this leaves the mandate with its Article 6 that encourages close settlement by Jews on the land, and the mandate clearly includes Judea and Samaria. So we have the tools, we have the documents, we have the history, we have allies who want to unite with us, not only for the sake of Israel, but for the sake of rule of law. There's only one thing we have to do. We have to pick up the tools, we have to use them, we have to enforce our rights, we have to disrupt the false narrative. We have to be lionesses or lion kings. What? And it's been famously stated by a South African general in 1920 regarding the inclusion of the Balfour Declaration in the San Remo Convention and later in the British Mandate. He said, "The promise to Abraham has become part of international law." And now's the time. There's been a change. We've spoken about it. We feel it. Now's the time to move towards sovereignty. Shabbat shalom.
Wow. Fantastic. Fantastic. Amazing. Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you.